Hi, everyone. I'm Alana, Wilderness Torah's Community Programs Manager, and I wanted to introduce myself and welcome you all to the virtual village. In response to these uncertain times and the unfortunate cancellation of our annual Passover in the Desert Festival, we decided to use all of our energy to create the virtual village. As a part of awakening the earth-based traditions of Jewish Torah creates village life during our immersive land-based festival, such as Passover in the desert, which many of us would have been at right now, by uplifting and encouraging the individual gifts of the collective community. 4 times a week in this village space, you will learn from Wilderness Torah core community members who are sharing their gifts, as well as longtime stakeholders in the earth-based Jewish movement, such as Rabbi Jill Hammer, including rabbis and priestesses and many others. Sessions will range in topics such as Torah study, nature connection, spirituality, and embodiment practices. We are truly looking towards nature and asking, what can this time teach us? Thank you all for being here with us today. We're really excited to have you part of our village. We're committed to keeping the virtual village accessible and free. If you would like to support Wilderness Torah in this effort, we welcome any and all donations, big or small, as we endeavor to provide Jewish wisdom and community building through this hard time. If you are new to Wilderness Torah or would like to find out more about what we do and how to get involved, Malka, my peer, will put the link of our website and donation page in our chat. Just so all of you know, this session is being recorded and is live streamed to Facebook. We will be uploading all of our recorded sessions to our website. So if you missed any, please go there and check out what we have in store. I'd love to see a raise of hands, anyone who this is their first Wilderness Torah program. And anyone who it's their first virtual village program. Awesome. We're so glad to have you here. And without further ado, I'm so excited to welcome and introduce Rabbi Jill Hammer, who is a PhD and the co-founder of Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute and the director of spiritual education at the Academy for Jewish Religion, and serves as core faculty for the Olive Ordination Program's Earth-Based Judaism track. She is the author of the Jewish Book of Days, a companion for all seasons, the Omer Calendar of Biblical Women, the Hebrew Priestess, Ancient and New Visions of Jewish Women's Spiritual Leadership with Taya Sher, Sidur HaKanot, a Hebrew Priestess prayer book with Taya Sher, and the Book of Earth and Other Mysteries, and her forthcoming book is titled Return to the Place, the Magic, Meditation, and Mystery of Sefer Yetzirah. She's a poet, scholar, ritualist, dream worker, and essayist, and we are so lucky to have you here with us today.
Thank you so very much. Thank you to Wilderness Torah. I'm really delighted to get to be here and to study these really interesting matters with all of you. I'm grateful to Reb Zelig and everyone who works in Wilderness Torah for this wonderful virtual village. And I want to invite everyone, I'll say a little bit about myself and then we'll dive into the topic. And I want to invite that at any point that you'd like to volunteer something, please feel free to either just let me know in your video or also put it in the chat. That will help me know that you'd like to share. I really would love this to be a collaboration among all of us. And I'll just say, in addition to the bio, that I'm someone who has really lived close to the earth in certain ways my whole life. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, raised by two people who loved gardening more or less more than anything else. And nature is really the place where I find my home, my body home, and my soul home. And I'm very eager to co-create a Judaism that has the earth and the body as a primary spiritual focus. So that's much of the intention that I'll be sharing today as we discuss the ritual of the red heifer. And I'm looking forward to hearing all of your voices as well. So when I was thinking about what would be good to share in a Wilderness Torah village, in a global village of this kind, I thought immediately of the ritual of the red heifer, and the ways in which this particular ritual kind of invites us into our ancestors' worldview as it relates to life and death and the cycles of life and death. So the para aduma, the red heifer, is the ritual I want to talk about with you today, and I want to offer a particular perspective on it, a particular way that we can think about it, but with an avenue toward how do we think in these life and death times, how do we think about life and death as sacred? Like, how do we understand the quality of life, and particularly the quality of death, right, as either as something that is sacred, right, or something that is not sacred, right, something that is to be pushed off as much as possible, right, as something that is to be separated from us to the extent that we're able to do that. And for a lot of people who are working on a more ecological view of the world, right, in which we understand that death is actually a part of how physical beings exist on this planet, the attempt to sort of revisit what do we think about this phenomenon called death, right, which is so deeply terrifying and tragic for human beings, is also a part of the ecology in which we live. And how do we deal with that? And how did our ancestors deal with that? And particularly the sense of what does it mean to be close to death, right? How do we react to having been close to death? A lot of people around, in our society right now are close to death either because they're ill or they're caring for people who are ill. And this is an experience our ancestors knew about, right? They knew that this was something that was frightening. It was something that often they avoided. It was something that for some people happened all the time, right? They were often close to death. And I want to look at this ritual as a way of thinking about and rethinking, like, how do we understand the sanctity of being alive and the sanctity of dying? So for how many people is the term red heifer sort of remotely familiar? You think you might know what that means, or you know that you know what that means. Great. For how many people is this sort of a Jewish ritual that maybe you haven't heard about? Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to begin by just sharing a little bit about why this is relevant. I'm going to share for a moment my source sheet. And maybe before I define the ritual itself, I'm going to just invite us into a world. I'm going to invite us into a particular space that I want us to be living in during this hour, a mythic space. So I'm going to begin with these 3 quotes. Ancient Near Eastern thought conceived the world as structured in 3 levels: the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you live in a kind of universe sandwich, right? That we live in the human world, or the world of reality as we know it, right? The human, animal, plants, material world. There is a heavenly world, right? And if we could get up there according to this worldview, right, we might meet God, we might see angels, right? There's a world above. And then there's a world below, right? There's an underworld. So what's down there? Well, one of the things that's down there is the Tehom, the deep waters, sort of the waters that are the underpinning of creation. What else is down there? Anybody want to venture a guess? You can just say it or put it in the chat. So another thing, say again?
The hell realms, perhaps.
Yeah. Later on, it's often defined as like hell, right? As sort of the place that the sort of problematic souls go. But if you mean hell in the terms of like Hades, right? That was how our earliest ancestors understood. The ancestors are down there, right? The ancestors live sort of in the, in the earth, sort of in the tombs. That was the understanding of our earliest ancestors, was the ancestors live in the earth. So if we, so we have to think of that as another kind of mythic realm that's separate from the realm above, right? But that is also separate from the realm of life as we know it. So sort of hold that sandwich in your mind. So Isaiah says something similar. Isaiah is here in this text, the prophet Isaiah is speaking to a king, and he wants to demonstrate that he's really a prophet. And he says, you ask for a sign from God, right? Ask for a sign from Adonai, your God. Ask for anything from the depths of Sheol or from the heights above. So you can see here that Isaiah has the same worldview, right? He says, I'm going to go to the other world. I'm going to get you information. And where am I going to get it from? I'm going to get it either from Shemayim, right, from the heavens, right, from the Adonai Elohecha, or I'm going to get it from Sheolah, right, from the world of the ancestors, from below. What I'm going to suggest in our time together is that because of this worldview our ancestors had, right, they also understood, right, the realm of God and of eternity as being separate from, right, the realm of mortality and fertility, right, the realm of the ancestors, the realm in which death and birth are always arising. So we have this distinction between the realm of eternity sort of and the realm of change. In the Levitical understanding, right, in Leviticus, in the understanding of our ancestors when they were talking about energetics, right, the energetics that our ancestors cared about. And they don't use the word energy exactly, but it's really very similar to what they mean. There are certain kinds of body functions and experiences that can render you something called tameh, right? The other noun for this, tum'ah. This is usually translated as impurity. I'm going to leave it untranslated for right now, right? But it's usually understood as impurity. If you have tum'ah, if you have this energetic state, right, you're not supposed to go into the sanctuary, right, into the place where you make offerings to God. If you are tahor, which means not in that energetic state, right? If you're in the energetic state of not having been in contact with things that make you tameh, I'll tell you what those things are in a minute, then you can go into the sanctuary. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment just so that I can see everybody. Is that clear? All right, is that clear? Right, so there are these two energetic states. There's tameh and there's tahor, right? There's, right, what is often translated impurity and purity. Right, I'm going to sort of problematize that in a second. What makes you tameh? So coming in contact with a dead body can make you tameh. Anybody else know what can make you tameh? Right, bleeding, right? Menstrual blood can make you tameh. Childbirth can make you tameh. Yep, going to war can make you tameh. Sex can make you tameh. Right? Ejaculation of any kind can make you tameh. Killing an animal doesn't make you tameh, actually, I don't think. So what do all these things sound like they might have in common? Yeah, skin diseases, yes. Certain kinds of disease, sara'at, which is often translated leprosy, it's not leprosy, right? Sara'at can make you tameh. So what does this all have in common? They use the term tameh sometimes to mean moral tameh, right? Meaning you've done something unethical, but in terms of the actual energetic state, that's more of a metaphor. It really has to do with these particular states. Okay, so yeah, so I see two people talking about life and death, right? And that is generally what makes you tameh, right? Any brush with any brush with life and death, Zoe says, is quoting Rabbi Dan, make you tameh. Great. Creation, right, and destruction. Those things make you tameh. So anything that's going to generate another life, right, like bleeding or childbirth, right, or right, all of those things, right? Anything associated with death, particularly human death, right, can make you tameh. So, so that's interesting. Why would those things make us, right, put us in a state of not being able to go into the sanctuary? So lots and lots has been said about this, and I want to offer a particular kind of perspective. So I don't want us to go sort of everywhere with this, but I am sort of curious to start the conversation around. So why would those things make a person unable to go into the sanctuary? And we would think that actually you might be running to the sanctuary if those things were happening to you, right? You might really want to be in contact with the divine, if you were expecting, right? Or if you were, right, you were mourning, right? So why would those things exclude you? So a couple of people were talking about sort of liminality and boundaries. I love this. It's like, I don't have to tell you guys anything. You can all teach this class. You're all right on top of exactly what I want to say. That actually really is what I think that, and feel free, by the way, to share my voice also. I want that too. So I really do think that tum'ah is about liminality, right, which is kind of a fancy word for not being in a clear state. Right, when you're in tahor, right, when you can go into the sanctuary, you're in a clear state, and when you're in tum'ah, you seem to be in some kind of liminal state. You're in the state of either moving into life, right, or moving into death, right. So it has something to do with liminality. But again, like, why is liminality such a big problem? Right? Why would we be worried about liminality? So people have said things like, it's in order to give people sort of their own space, right? You shouldn't go into the sanctuary because, as someone who's given birth or someone who's mourning, right, you might kind of need your own space. Or you might sort of be energetically sort of not clear in a way that might cause, some energetic disruption. Like, that's another thing that people sometimes talk about this. Right, exactly. Like liminality, you think that's exactly when you would want to go to a sanctuary. So here I want to, yes, is that Sarah Lise? Yeah.
I have heard in indigenous ways of knowing that when, for example, someone is in their moon time, if they're bleeding, it's like too much power, too much of that edge state is being drawn to them, and it disrupts the energetics of the other people around them, which is why you can't go into a sweat lodge when you are bleeding. Because it can throw off everything else.
That sounds kind of similar to what our ancestors might have thought about it, right? They might have thought something similar since they asked people not to go into the sanctuary. I'm going to add, sort of from my point of view, sort of in the way that I think about this, from the particular kind of feminism that I'm interested in, that I want to acknowledge this as both really powerful and also kind of problematic. Right, that there's this sense of life and death, which were often the areas, right, that birth-giving people were close to, were the areas that would sort of keep you out of the sanctuary. For me, is a political problem, right? That's and maybe was meant as a certain kind of exclusion of certain kinds of sacred workers from the priesthood, sort of from the sanctuary, like people who work with death and life and fertility. We're then therefore outside the sanctuary. So I want to acknowledge that as a problem. And I also want to say that there could be a lot of wisdom here, right? In terms of the power of the energetics of people's bodies and the power of life and death. So I want to say that for me, I think about things in both of those ways. So I'm really grateful for what Sarah Elise said. So our later ancestors in the Talmud looked at this, so now we're ready to talk about the red heifer ritual. The red heifer ritual was a ritual that allowed people who had contracted a very intense kind of tum'ah, a very intense kind of energetic, sort of very kind of intense kind of energetic liminal state, to return to being able to go into the sanctuary. Now, for some kinds of tum'ah, you just had to go immerse yourself in a body of water, right? So some of you might be familiar with that practice around menstruation, right? Going to immerse in a body of water. But for some kinds of tumah, like being around a dead body, you had to have an extra kind of purification ritual. And this was called the ritual of the para aduma, the ritual of the red heifer. So I'm going to show you what this ritual looks like. And there's something very strange about, well, there's probably multiple things that are very strange about this ritual. Okay. So here we have the text, and I'm just going to read it for us. And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke to Moses and to Aaron, to Moshe and Aaron, saying, this is the statute of the law which Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has commanded, saying, tell the children of Israel to bring you a red heifer, that means a red cow, basically, faultless with no blemish. So an entirely red cow, like questions about whether there is such a thing as an entirely red cow, but okay, who has never worn a yoke. So we're talking about a very unique, probably young kind of cow. And you shall give her to Eleazar the priest, and she shall be brought forth without the camp, so that means right outside the camp, and she shall be slain before his face. Sorry for the old-fashioned language. And Eleazar the priest shall take of her blood with his finger and sprinkle of her blood toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. So in other words, she's made an offering of, or blood is sprinkled. The heifer is burnt, right? She shall be burnt in his sight, her skin and her flesh and her blood with her dung shall all be burnt. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet thread and cast it into the middle of the burning of the heifer. And then the priest shall wash his clothes and bathe his flesh in water, and afterward he may come into the camp, and the priest shall be tameh until the evening. So a couple of things to notice here. First of all, that this red cow is an essential ingredient in the potion that allows people to re-enter the sacred spaces. Second of all, the other ingredients in this potion are red thread, cedar, and hyssop. Third of all, the person who makes the potion becomes tameh, even though the potion makes people tahor. So this is weird. Okay, I mean, the whole thing obviously is not, in our cultural context, but this is strange. It's like we're making a potion that allows people to be tahor, even though they've been made tameh. But the person who makes the potion becomes tameh, right? And has to go outside the camp and be treated as someone who is, who's in this state of tumah. I want to note spatially that the sacred space is at the center of the camp. People live around that, and then around that is outside the camp. And where you go if you're tameh is outside the camp, and where you can go if you're tahor is in the center in the sacred space. I just want us to understand that spatially, because it's very similar to heaven, earth, underworld, right? Although that's not concentric, but it has a similarity to it that I'm going to say more about. So the person who burns the calf becomes tameh. A clean person has to go get the ashes and use and make that into what's called mei nidah, a water of sprinkling. Interesting, nidah also means a woman who, a person who's been menstruating who's in a state of tumah. And all the people who deal with the ashes become tameh, and everyone who gets the ashes used on them becomes tahor. So this is, there's something that on first glance appears counterintuitive about this, right? That the potion seems to be something that does the opposite to the people who make it of what it does to the people who use it. So what's going on? It appears that this potion made out of the red heifer is a state-changing substance. If you're in a state of liminality, it puts you in a state of non-liminality. If you're in a state of non-liminality, it puts you in a state of liminality, right? It makes things change. And what's in it? I'm going to just type it in the chat so we all remember. Hyssop, red thread, cedar, and the red cow. So why are these state-changing things? And if you don't know, it's fine, because remember, the Talmud cannot make sense of this. The Talmud said this ritual makes no sense. We don't understand. It's only because God wanted to mess with our heads, basically. The ritual does not make sense. It's a chok. It means it has no reason. Red is definitely a common element, right? There's the red thread, which might be, right, birth, right? There's cedar, which is what the sanctuary is made out of. Cedar is a purifying element. Red cow, which is slaughtered, right? So a cow life, right, that's slaughtered. And hyssop is what was used to put the blood on the doorpost, right, on the night of the 10th plague. Right? So a lot of these things are associated with life and death and things that are somehow in between those two things. So we have this state-changing potion. So now I want to suggest something about how our ancestors might have been thinking about this. So I talked about, right, we have this horizontal architecture of holy space, mundane space, wilderness. And then we have heaven, earth, and underworld. What if we are dealing with two different kinds of holiness? Right? What if we are dealing with tahor as a kind of holiness that relates to eternity, right? And tum'ah as a kind of holiness that relates to state change? I want to offer some proof for what I am suggesting. And the first thing I want to offer is the Yom Kippur ritual. So as some of you may recall, on Yom Kippur, this I think is not the right thing, hold on. Oh, wait. Share, here we are. So on Yom Kippur, are you seeing the source sheet? I think you're seeing my notes. You are, okay. So on Yom Kippur, we have this particular ritual that is done to atone for the whole people, where there are two he-goats. The high priest takes them both. One of them is for God, and one of them is for Azazel. We don't know who Azazel is. The goat for God is slaughtered and is offered in the sacred place. Where does the other goat go? Right, the other goat goes into the wilderness. So we have here actually in the most sacred day of the year, we have a ritual where one offering is made into the sacred place and the other offering is made into the wilderness. Now, and then later on, the ancestors go crazy about this. Like, what? You don't make offerings outside the sacred place and not to other entities than God, and what's happening here? And it's not really an offering. And so there's a lot of confusion about this later on. But if you think about it as sacred space, wilderness, right? Wilderness as the place of liminality, sacred space is the place of eternity, right? Making offerings in both places makes sense. Noting that the one who sets the Azazel goat free, the one in the wilderness, becomes tameh. Right? There's something about the wilderness that is connected to the state of tum'ah. That's why lepers have to go to the wilderness. Right? That's why the dead have to be brought into the right outside the camp. Of course, there's some sanitary stuff, involved here that makes sense. And now I want you to look at this text from Leviticus 17, where they're talking about making offerings in the sacred place. And there's a request, an order really from Moses, saying you should bring the sacrifices that you have been making in the wilderness, al pnei hasadeh, that you have been making in the wilderness, bring those to the entrance to the tent of meeting and offer them there, and don't offer sacrifices anymore, right, to the goat beings after whom they stray. What goat beings? Wait, what happened? Right, Haseirim, right, the satyrs, the goat beings, right? We're making this a law for your generations. So we don't really know exactly what kind of ritual this is, right? But somehow we have an old practice of making offerings in the sanctuary and also in the wilderness. Right? So we have, again, this sort of split screen. Cool, somebody just found an egg. All right, so I'm going to move a little bit fast here and say, so another way that we might consider that it could be true that both of these realms were considered to be sacred is that the ritual for re-entering one is the same whether you're moving from the wilderness to the camp or whether you're moving from the camp to the holy place. The priests, when they are ordained to serve in the holy place, they have a ritual where blood is dabbed on their ear, their thumb, and their big toe. Right? They have this. They have this ritual. It's in Leviticus 8. Right? Moses took some of the blood of the ram of ordination and put it on the ridge of Aaron's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Right? This is part of the anointing ritual that makes you a priest who's able to serve in the holy places and go in the most holy places where other people aren't allowed to go. Okay. Now, if you have been afflicted with tsarat, with this leper, the skin condition that makes you white, that makes you look like you're dead, basically, you're supposed to go outside the camp, and you are permanently tameh, right? You can't become tahor if you have this disease, which is not what we should do with sick people, but that's this is how that disease is understood biblically. In order for the leper to come, after they've been cured of their illness, to come back into the regular camp, right, to be able to be sort of in a regular state again, they also have to make offerings. There are 2 birds that have to be offered. One of them gets offered to God, the other one is sent to the wilderness. So we have, again, the same thing with 2 offerings, right? One for the center, one for the wilderness, right? And before they set the bird free and the other one is killed, they have to be dipped in the live bird has to be dipped in the blood of the bird that was slaughtered. And what do you have to include? Red thread, hyssop, and cedar. Right. So once again, we have this state-changing potion. Right, ingredients being used to change the state of the person who's tameh in this kind of a permanent, intense way, right, so that they can come back into the camp. And then they get anointed on their ear, on their thumb, and on their big toe, just like a priest. Those are the only 2 times that we ever see this ritual, is when a priest is admitted into the holy place and when a leper is readmitted into the camp. So there's a similarity when you cross from one sort of other world into the camp, right? And then there's a similar ritual when you go from the camp into the holy place. So I have the sense that our ancestors lived in this kind of sandwich, right? Where there was the wilderness in some way for them embodied this place of liminality, of birth and death. And then the holy place seemed to be free of that, right? A place where, right, you could sort of be in a steady state. So somebody asked, what's the significance of those body parts on the priests? Probably like to listen to God, to do God's work, and to walk in God's ways. That's how I've always understood it, but there could be other ways as well. So I want to talk with you a little bit. There are a few more things I want to share before we're done, but I would love to hear what you're all thinking about this. So how does this feel to you? And I'll just sort of frame that with a question, which is, for me, this takes a system of purity that did not feel very relevant to my life and helps it to feel relevant, because I'm interested in this sense of the sacred as a place where I can go to escape my kind of mortality, my physical limitations, and also the sacred as a place where I deepen into those truths, right? Where life and death become the sacredness, right? Become the teaching. So that's part of what's relevant about it for me. But I would love to hear how this is landing for you.
Well, Jill, hi.
Yeah.
It's Amanda. It just right now is really resonating because of the Song of Songs also really kind of taking place between the palace and the fields. And when you were just speaking right now, it just made me realize or think that there, used to be kind of these 2 faces of the divine, the Yud-He and the Vav-He, and they were separated, or their Shekhinah is in exile in the wilderness. And so maybe there's like the offering and the sacrifices. When you said about the 2 doves, it just made sense. Like, oh, we offer in these 2 places because they are both divine places. But there's that tension almost between them. And we now are in this place of where we mostly are accustomed to worshiping and sacrificing and everything just in the like palace, in the synagogue, in the temple itself, and not in the wilderness.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. That feels really beautiful. And it reminds me also to say that I think that this way of seeing, or this way of understanding, is a medicine for the avoidance of death, which is so prevalent in our society, right? For the sense that death is kind of an intruder on the realms, that it's a stranger here. It's not supposed to be here. And it's better if we don't talk about it. And there's I think some medicine in this, in the system for working with that. I want to read some of the things that people are saying in the chat. Dana says it also feels like it might be sanctifying the wilderness as a holy space that the afflicted had to live in, and honor the person for having lived there. And I love that. And it reminds me of the story of Miriam, right? Because she's sent into the wilderness, right? Instead of being ordained, right? Like Aaron, like she gets sent into the wilderness instead in this sort of horrible way. Yeah. Is that what you were thinking of?
It was like half that and half also trying to like, if we're framing the wilderness as a second holy place, and death as that holy place as well, then like how are we sanctifying? If we're sanctifying the person for having lived there and for coming back into the mundane realm, just the same as we ordain people into the temple, into the priesthood, it makes sense that you're honoring this person for their time in the wilderness, and this time in a place that is usually for the dead, and honoring the wisdom that comes from that as they return into the congregation of the tent dwellers.
Great. I love that. And I love that revelation tends to happen in wildernesses, not in shrines, right? So there's there's that connection as well. And this also means that Miriam received the same ritual that her brother received, for becoming the high priest, right? Miriam has the same anointing when she comes back from the wilderness. So that's that's kind of mind blowing. That for me implies almost two kinds of priesthood, and I find that really exciting.
It feels like a really queer taking up of the ritual as well, of anointing for the priesthood.
Yeah. Wonderful. Alicia notes, I wonder if these rituals provide some kind of spiritual or therapeutic benefit for people who are in a state of transition. And I think that's absolutely right. And there was a wonderful book about Leviticus, and maybe I'll think of it before the end of it's written by two rabbis who are chaplains, that discusses these rituals as a model for how we can sort of therapeutically deal with what it means to be in contact with death and illness, right? And sort of intense life states. And Maps of Meaning, it's called Maps of Meaning. It's a wonderful book. It discusses exactly that there's therapeutic benefit to acknowledging the power of these states, from being in very intense contact with death or with life, right, to being in the regular community again, right? And why we might need rituals for that, right? Or for going into a very intense sacred space of another kind. And Alexander writes, I'm feeling deep relief in hearing the wisdom of our ancestors in perfect harmony with the indigenous wisdom traditions I carry. The three realms, ancestors and the underworld, the honoring and interaction with the wilderness as entity and collaborator, just as is creator. Yeah, I resonate with that. And I actually want to read something to you that resonates with that as well. So if you think about the words tahor and tameh, I want to just say something about the word tahor, which we haven't said much about, sort of this purity state. What is, and tahor can refer to water, but one place that we see the word tohar, which is the noun form, right? Tahor is an adjective, right? Tohar is the noun, sort of or one of the nouns that comes from that root. So it means a clarity, a purity. And on Sinai, when the elders go up to the mountain and they see God, they actually see God, and God is walking on a floor, on a pavement of sapphire. And it says, "U'che'etzem hashamayim latohar." The pavement of sapphire was like the center of heaven in its purity. So we have there associated with the words tahor, with tohar, right, the idea of shemayim, that there's something about the sky that is associated with this idea of tahara, of purity. And so I wanted to share that. And the other thing I wanted to share that I was excited about is it's clear that Sheol is under the earth. But because there are lots of texts, like the witch of Endor calls Samuel up from under the ground, like it's clear that Sheol is under the earth or under the ocean. Sometimes Sheol is under the ocean. But there's a text in Psalms that says where the singer, the psalmist, is praising the divine creator, is praising how wondrously they were made. And they say, my bones were not concealed with you. Lo nechad atzmi mimecha, asher asiti baseter, rukamti betachtiot aretz. My bones were not concealed from you when you made me in a secret place, when I was woven in the depths of the earth. So I love that. And that's from Psalms 139. And what it implies is that even before the human being is made inside the womb, like the human being is made in the depths of the earth. Now that could be a connection to the story of how God makes human beings. But I think it's really interesting that here in Psalms, which is a very old text, Psalms is very old stuff in it, that we have this hint that, that in some way souls come from the ground. So we have the idea that life starts there too, right? As well as the dead ending up there. So that feels, relevant to this discussion as well. So moving back to our contemporary discussion, this is a ritual that hasn't been performed in thousands of years, right? It's a ritual that gets discussed in kind of very arcane Jewish circles. And once in a while, somebody finds a red heifer, and then there's a newspaper article about how there was a real red heifer. Maybe the Messiah is coming. It's kind of this quintessentially, it's a ritual that's defined by its non-performance, right? People don't ever do this. And yet there's something so powerful and relevant about requiring some kind of medicine for going between states. So I have two questions, and really these are also questions not just questions I'm asking you, but questions I have. And one question is, so how do we recreate this today? Like how, or if we wanted to do that, like how do we think about how to honor these sacred states today? And the other question being, what do we think about this question of separating these states, right? Because on the one hand, there's something incredibly powerful about this kind of, this sandwich, right? Of having, right, the wilderness as a sacred place and the center of the shrine as a sacred place. And, right, the state of Tumah has been understood as not a good thing, right? For, in terms of the kind of access you get to sanctity, right, for thousands of years. Right, there is a cost to being in Tumah, right? There's a and sometimes the Bible uses Tumah to mean something really not pleasant, right? That Tumah can mean something that's really embarrassing and really is kind of dirty. And many people will hasten to tell you that's not really what it means, and I agree that that's not really what it means. But there are some texts that treat it that way. So how would we move to a place where Tameh and Tahor really were both understood as sacred? So those are some of my questions. And I see Sarah Elise, but I know other people haven't gotten a chance. But I don't see other hands. So go ahead, Sarah Elise.
Well, harking back to what you were saying earlier about like both this idea of sacredness and the idea of like it being a dirty thing, the feminist looking at these two states, and it makes me the difference between how Aaron was made a priest and how Miriam was sanctified, of this the traditional realms where the women, the birthing people, were gathering medicine out in the wilderness, who were going to the wilderness to become sanctified, who were these kind of shepherds between creation and death, the people who are there, and how then that was able to be kind of like made into dirty states by folks who were like in the inner sanctum, who were the priests who were in the temple, who were in this place, who were able to then kind of discredit. And I'm having feelings of anger about that process, and it feels really clear to me, even more so than before, that is like a step that was taken of making the wilderness less holy, as a place that you didn't go to, that things were sent to. Yeah, I'm pissed off.
I hear that. And it contradicts other things, right? Because Sinai happens in the wilderness. Sinai doesn't happen in the temple, right? No, I hear that. I share that. Yeah. Amy, sorry, everybody.
So,
yeah, Amy, please go ahead.
to cue off of the previous comment. So my understanding of Aaron, which is not very deep, is that he was kind of a nothing and got his priesthood because he got I could not be remembering this correctly. He got his priesthood because he got everybody to donate their gold and so on so he can make the golden calf. Whereas Miriam, who gets exiled to the, in quotes, wilderness, was really the holy person. I mean, without her, we wouldn't be who we are. So there is a lot of troubling information that gets raised here. And what I hear from this story today about the red heifer and so on is that some of these rituals, these rituals and traditions were so deep within these people that were living in the desert that the people who were in the sanctuary couldn't get rid of them. And so they had to codify them in some way because people needed them, just like we need them now.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Thank you. I agree that I think that this is needed, and the way that it is kind of structured and slanted, may have to do with sort of who's in charge of, of the ritual language. But I agree that these rituals address really strong needs and feelings that people have. And they allow for the expression of feelings, right, about death, feelings about life, right, feelings about the messiness of all that. These rituals, address that and sort of made a space for that to unfold with witness, right, and with sanctification that I think is really, really important. So I want to show you one last quote that I love. And this is also from the book of Psalms. The psalmist is great. The psalmist always has is always really centered in the emotions. And the psalmist says, if I ascend to heaven, you are there. And if I descend to Sheol, Sheol's the underworld, right? If I descend to Sheol, you're there too. So this is a statement of God being everywhere. But it also is, we also see these two realms, again, both as places where, the presence can be. And right now, as we're dealing with a lot of death, the sense that is holy and that the process of dealing with that, has holiness feels so important to me. So there are some things in the chat to address, so I'll do that. Someone noted, Maria noted that, today when people are in a state of mourning, right, there are a lot of rituals around, around mourning, so that allow that experience to be held. Right? In some ways, I think that a transformation of the understanding of Tuma could allow us to hold it better, right? Could allow us to hold it as a wilderness state, right? As a sacred state that requires, that requires a careful holding. Requires a sort of a careful attention, right, to being and to being close to these generative and destructive forces that are, that come through us and yet that are so much bigger than us. So someone asked about the difference between Sheol and She'elah as in a question, and it's a very good question because Sheol means the asking place. Right, the word for the underworld where the ancestors live means the place where we ask questions. So maybe that's because we don't know what's there, so we ask questions about it. But I think more, it's the world where we would go to ask the ancestors for help. Right, we go to ask them things. So Sheol and the word for question is connected. So I wanted to say, so someone asked, Zelig asked, why a red heifer? Why a cow and not a sheep? Well, some of it is, I think, because cows are milked, right? And milk is associated with life, right? And with birth. I think that's why. The sages have a different answer, right? They answer that it's related to the golden calf, right? That in some way the red heifer comes as an atonement for the golden calf, and that's why a cow. I don't think so, but I also think the answer may be lost in mythic history here. Like, I think there may be some associations with cow that we don't have them. We don't know what they are. But I suspect it has to do with the cow as a life giver, as a giver of milk to to human beings as well as to baby cows. And someone else says, how might this topic be tied into today's Omer of the Chesed of Gevura? And that's perfect, right? Because indeed, this is the 8th day of the Omer. It's Chesed Shebe Gevura. And this was Joe's observation, and it's great because Gevura is limitation, right? And Chesed is boundlessness. And that's probably why our ancestors gravitated toward Tahor, right? This is a state of boundlessness, right? When you're not being limited by birth and death, right? You're infinite, right? You're connected to what is infinite, right? That's how I understand the state of Tahor to be in the sanctuary, right? We go there to connect with God who doesn't have limitations, right? Who doesn't have like a time-bound view of the universe. And that's something that we crave as human beings. We crave to be in that boundless state, right? And right, it's also really essential for us to be connected to our bodies and and our own life and death cycle. So it absolutely is related to today. Clearly, you scheduled this on exactly the right day of the Omer, right? Because Gevur is about boundary, and Chesed is about not having boundaries. Maybe we need them together. And maybe the red thread, Zelig points out, maybe the red thread has to do with drawing boundaries. I think the thread also, and that this is my own mythic association, which I can't shift, and it was also the umbilical cord. Red thread, is also the cord, and it's called talat shani, sort of the worm, the red that comes from the worm, is the name of the color, and the worm also to me feels like the umbilical cord, and that's part of why I think it's there. Someone else points out that sheep and goats make milk too. That's absolutely true. I don't know what to say. I don't know why a red cow, but that's just my thought. And Lily writes, I don't think we're ever in a state apart from life and death. And maybe this is a great place to end. It's true, although I think that when we identify with the whole, we do go to a place that is not bounded by our own life and death. I think there's a way that I think that can be true, but certainly as beings who live in bodies, we're never too far from the sources of life and death. And I think we need the wilderness just as much as we need we need the sacred space, or maybe if we think about, having new priestly rituals, new priests and priestesses today, maybe we need sacred workers of the wilderness, as much as we need sacred workers in the sacred spaces that we're already familiar with. Maybe we need sacred workers who are going to delve into the mysteries of, of life and death and liminality. That's where I find my energy being drawn. If I were going to go back and spend time in one of those sacred places, that's the one that really draws me. So I want to thank everybody. I'm so grateful to Wilderness Torah. I'm so grateful to Reb Zelig for inviting me to do this. And thank you, Alana, and thank you everybody. And I hope you'll go out, and I hope this will, encourage you that when you're feeling, deep in the problems of this difficult time, and in the sort of all of the tumult that we're enduring, that this will be a little bit of a strengthening for us, that this too is sacred, as difficult as it may be, and that we draw close to the people who are enduring it most, and not socially distanced, but not emotionally distanced. That we stay in the mix with them and are their witnesses. And may our work together today, may our learning together today be for the healing of many. And thank you, everybody.
Wow, thank you so much. Just want to give a beautiful blessing goodbye to everybody. My name is Malka. I am Wilderness Torah's Logistics and Community Programs Manager, and just want to say thank you, and we're so grateful that you are in virtual community with us, everybody on this call. All of our sessions are being recorded unless otherwise noted and posted on our website within a week after we live stream. You can join us tonight for Kabbalat Shabbat in the same Zoom room with Urban on Dama tonight at 5:30 Pacific time. As well, our upcoming sessions next week will be the same time as this, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. We have 4 sessions next week as we introduce a new Wilderness Torah resident hour with our very own Rabbi Zelig. We'll be taught by Rose Rothfeder around ancestors and plant medicine on Monday, permaculture and Jewish agricultural systems with Tali Weinberg on Wednesday, and Friday, Wonder and Awe, the radical amazement of Abraham Joshua Heschel with Rabbi Mike Cummins. Stay tuned for our newsletter every week that states our upcoming Virtual Village programming. You can check out our Facebook, our Instagram as well for more updates. And Alana just inserted our website into the chat, as well as a donation page if you feel called to support our work in a deeper way. And a special thank you, of course, to Rabbi Jill Hammer. Such a blessing and such an honor to learn with you. We are so grateful to be here in this space. And I'm going to unmute everybody just to say goodbye and hope you all have a blessed day. Thank you so much.
Yashikar, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Yaela.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Lehitraot.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
The first one.